Hi everyone, I'm Allie Buchman and I am going to be doing a wire bracelet for you that uses just a household item and then your regular jewelry making pliers. I'm going to be doing this Neptune bracelet, which has the rings going around, and they are actually in a figure 8 design. For this example, I used 18 gauge artistic wire. It works, it's a little on the flimsier side though, so I'm going to be using German style wire for this one instead. You can use 2 different gauges of wire for this, whether or not you want to use 18 gauge or I'm going to be using 16 gauge. 16 gauge is my preferred size. I had 18 gauge sitting around at home at first, and that's how I made the example piece, is with the 18 gauge. It would work with the German style, which is going to be a little bit harder and stiffer than the art wire. The art wire is really pretty flimsy and flexible, which is great for some things but not appropriate for others. So I'm going to use the German style wire, which has a harder temper and is going to keep its shape a little bit better. And also I'm using a thicker gauge. So I'm using the 16 gauge wire, which is going to hold this shape a little bit better so I can wear it actually as a bangle. This one will keep its shape, it's just a little not so sturdy. What I'm going to be doing is using 18 gauge wire, and I'm going to be making these rings using a Sharpie marker. You can play around with the design and test some pens that you have at home. We also actually sell tools for this. They're bail making pliers that you can use, but I have a Sharpie here at home. This is an ultra fine point Sharpie. This is the thickness that I like in order to use an 8mm bead, which is what I have here. I have the Mojave Turquoise, which is a dyed blue. It has that pretty baby blue color with the veins going through it, which I prefer and I like. The whole Sleeping Beauty turquoise that's perfectly blue is not my thing. I think they look fake. So I like to see the veins in my turquoise or turquoise colored beads. So the 8mm beads will fit great inside the diameter here of the Sharpie. You can also use a thick Sharpie, you could use a ballpoint pen and use a 6mm, so there's a lot of different varieties that you could use, or you can get a bail making pliers, which you could use as well and get those measurements if you feel uncomfortable holding on to the pen and bending the wire. In addition to my thicker 16 gauge wire in my German style silver plated wire, I'm going to be using 24 gauge wire, and I have the German style wire here. It wouldn't matter whether or not you use the Art Wire brand 24 or the German style 24. It's such a thin gauge that it's really not going to matter, and we're using that after the fact to decorate up those loops and to hold those beads in place. I also have sitting here some O beads. These are Crystal Labrador O beads in the Crystal Labrador full. I'm going to use those on the sides of my beads to just look like little bead caps. In my example here, I used glass pearls in the brown iris color and then the hematite Potomac crystal to sit right inside there. So I'm going to change it up just a little bit to show you guys the variety that you can use. You're going to need a couple pliers to work with. I have a round nose pliers here. The jaws get bigger and the rounded loops are going to get bigger as it gets closer to your hand. I have a wire cutters, and this is the Sparkle tool set that I'm using. It's a Bead tool set, and I really like it. It has a nice sharp cutters and a V on the other side. The flat side is always going to be on our project side, and then I have the wide jaw pliers here. And Bead's wide jaw are actually not that wide, so they're nice to work with. And when you're working with a thicker, heavier wire, which we are, the wide jaws are pretty nice to work with. I'm working on a bead mat that's going to catch any little wire scraps as I kind of cut them. And I also have a handy dandy ruler. It's actually a yardstick that I have, but we're going to be using the ruler function of it. So if you have a 12-inch ruler, that will work as well. Just something to measure with. And those are the materials that we're going to need to do this Neptune bracelet. So right now we're going to talk about measurement. For this bracelet, you're going to use a lot of wire. I'm actually, because of the way that I shoot the video, I've actually pre-done my base of my bracelet, which I'll instruct you how to do, but I'm going to do it with a smaller piece so that way it stays nice and in frame. If I move the camera back from me, you're not going to get the detail, so I want to keep it close, but because of that, I'm just going to do a small piece of wire and explain how to do it, but it's the exact same process the whole length. And what I'm going to do then is decorate it, adding my beads while using this whole length piece. So, how much wire do you need in order to do your bracelet? So my bracelet here is 13 rounded little Neptune rings long. So I have 13 beads that I'm using, and I made 13 loops. This is going to make about a 6.5 inch wrist bangle. You can have a clasp that you can add to it also. I can kind of show you how to do that at the end if you want to do a fun, funky clasp, but you don't need to. You can keep it as a bangle, especially if you're using the 16 gauge German style wire or sterling silver wire. You would want to use sterling silver. You could use soft or half hard for this technique. Sterling will harden as you wear it, so either would work. You're going to be using a lot more wire than you realize. So again, this is for a 6.5 inch bangle. And instead of using 6.5 inches, you're going to figure out about how much you need. Each loop, and I kind of tested this out and pulled wire apart, making the loops. Each loop here is going to use about 2.5 inches of wire, because we are actually going to be doing a loop and a half of wire per little loop here, per ring of my Neptune. So each loop is going to be 2.5 inches. It's going to be easier to think of it as an infinity sign, 5 inches. So 5 inches of wire will get you 2 of those loops, or 1 infinity sign. So counting my bracelet here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5 sets of infinities. So because I know that 5 inches is going to be 1 set of infinity, 5 times 6 is 30, and then plus 2.5 for the last one. So I'm going to need 32.5 inches to do my bracelet. I'm going to cut, or I did cut, my long piece of wire into 40 inches, and that's going to give me more than enough and have extra. And I did it as a measurement too, to make sure my calculations were correct. And I'm at the end, and guess what? I have those 9 inches left that I figured out exactly how many inches you need per bracelet. So if you're doing about a 6.5 inch wrist, long story short, you're going to want to do about 40 inches. You're going to need 32 inches, and then you're going to do an additional little bit to hold on to. So about 40. You really could do 6 less than this. So you could do 40 or 36 inches, but you still do want to have something to hold on to, and if you want to do a decorative clasp at the end. If you want the bracelet to be a little bit longer than 6.5, you're going to figure that each little section of 2, each of those infinities that are 5 inches of wire, is 1 inch. So if you need it to be 7.5 rather than 6.5, you're going to add another 5 inches of wire to your measurement. A lot of wire designing and wire jewelry tends to look very sloppy in my book, that the wires don't kind of match up. You can't see really what's going on. It gets clustered. So I like to do these measurements for my wire videos so that way you know exactly how much wire you're going to do and get that kind of perfectionist look in the wire working. So to get started, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to cut, and we're using all at once, and that's why I did this off screen, because it's a lot of wire going through the screen and going through the frame. So you're going to want to cut 40 inches of your 16 gauge wire, because again, it's going to kind of get crazy long and big and be out of frame. I'm just going to work with a 7-inch piece, and I'm going to pull my ruler over, go to 7 inches, take my wire cutter here, and cut the wire off. So it's just giving me a little bit of extra playroom to make this figure 8. So the figure 8 design is actually the basis for this bracelet. Here's another piece of wire that I did ahead of time just to show you how we're getting that design. This figure 8 here is going to be our main design for a bracelet. Sounds really kind of simple, but you may even want to draw in your mind, or just kind of draw with the wire in mind exactly how that figure 8 is going. Once you have that mindset that you're doing constant loops, and I just did a seed bead video doing right angle weave, which is also loops, so I've kind of been doing loops all day. So an infinity sign is also going to be loops with the wire coming out. To do this, we're going to use our Sharpie marker, and I'm really not going to overthink this step. I'm literally making loops, and I'm making loops that are going to be 1.5 times around. I'm going to grab about a 1/4 or a 1/2 inch in on the wire, and I'm holding on to the Sharpie marker. I'm bending the wire around the Sharpie, and it's going to cross over completely on the Sharpie. I want that wire, when I'm doing it on the Sharpie, to be nice and tight around the Sharpie. I don't want to see any extra kind of play room in there. If you do have it, just kind of bend the wire out a little bit and then kind of re-roll that in place. I want to have a doubling effect where the wire is doubling over like a split ring. So if you do any jewelry making, you'll know what I mean by a split ring. A split ring, for those that aren't big on jewelry making, is going to be like a keychain style ring, that it has that going around and doubling in a certain area. So mine didn't get completely perfect, of course, because I'm filming, but I'm going to pull it back out and round it out. Once I have that loop, I always want to make sure that the loop is going above the previous one. So I'm actually going to turn it like that for you just to get in the habit. So there's the wire at the base is the little end, and my new loop is on top. I'm going to take this around a 1/2 turn of my loop. So I have my loop here, and it's going around 1 time and a 1/2. I'm then going to hold that loop underneath my Sharpie, and I'm going to make another loop in the same fashion with this wire going over top of the Sharpie. Again, I want it nice and tight around the Sharpie, bringing the wire around, and I'm also going to take that and double that wire as well. The closer you can keep those loops on the Sharpie, the better, and the nicer your project is going to end up being, because then you have those 2 perfect little loops, one on top of another. So that right there was about 5 inches of wire. I cut a little more than 7 inches, so about 7.5 is going to get me 3 loops. So I'll have enough here to do and show you one more loop. You want to get in the habit when you're doing this of always doing the new loop higher than the last loop, so it's almost like a step up. Because it's figure 8s, you're going to constantly see, as you get longer and longer, when you look to the side here, that you're going to see a pattern of 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1 going down the line. You want to make sure you maintain that. That's going to be the consistency factor. Also, the last loop that you did is always going to be underneath the new loop. It's not going to matter a ton. It's not going to affect your overall design. It's just that's my kind of pickiness of wire working. So my next loop that I make, I'm going to hold again at the end of my wire. I have pretty slender fingers, so I'm actually able to hold inside that loop, but you don't have to. You can just kind of hold that loop in place. The wire is behind the Sharpie, and I'm bending the wire around the Sharpie marker. And when I bring the wire around, again, I want to make sure that I'm going over the top of my previous loop. If your wire does get thrown off at all a little bit, with the 12 gauge wire, or with the 18 gauge wire, it's not too bad. You can go in with your pliers if you need to, kind of grab around that Sharpie and force it more into shape. And you can see now I really don't have much to hold on to. I just have just barely enough to finish off my loop there at the top. You always want to have just a little bit extra to hold, because it really is going to be quite difficult if you measure out exactly 32 inches to make your bracelet, or 32.5. I'm just going to use my round nose pliers and kind of half complete that loop to show you. So I have those loops there, which are just continuations basically of the same. You're just going to keep building and building and doing that same wire working technique, making sure, and I'll pick up this other one here, making sure that the next loop that you make, if you're here, is going to go over top of the other loop by the wire going around the Sharpie, over top of the last loop, halfway down, so you're going to end up with your double crossing line going right through the middle. and then you're going to pick up and go the opposite way for the figure 8. I'm going to run out of wire here. But that's going to get you those figure 8s, and you can play with them a little bit after if you want to line them up. They are going to sit a little bit funky. Don't worry too much about it because we are going to go in and add our beads into place. Again, you're going to maintain and see that pattern of 2, 1, 2, and then we would be adding here 2, 1, 2 basically. That whole pattern there on the side is going to be opposite. That's how you're going to do your entire base of your bracelet. Again, when it comes to the base, I did mine off screen because you're doing it as one long piece of wire, and 40 inches of wire is a ton to keep in frame, whereas my bracelet here, which is that 6.5 inches, will make it in the whole frame, so that'll be much easier to keep track of when we're watching. At the end here, I just did a little turnover loop with my wire, and that's just giving me something to hold on to. You can keep it on as a decorative function as you want. If you do want to keep it on and you do want to have that loop at the end, what you're going to do is that wire that was extra at the start, you're just going to take your round nose pliers, hold the end of the wire there, and just turn right on the pliers, and that's going to get you that little loop there. You can kind of play with it and move it exactly into place wherever you want, but that's going to give you a little handle almost to hold on to your project. So that's what I did on this end. And I did my loops then and got my 13 loops here in place and ready to go. Again, I cut 40 inches and I need 32.5. So I have those extra 8 inches basically left over of my wire that I am going to cut. That extra wire, if you want, I will show you how to do a clasp. But for now, I'm just going to do that little turnover loop to work as a handle. And I'm going to do the same thing where I'm just leaving and cutting about a 1/2 inch. And I'm going to turn the wire over, holding it at the end where I can see the wire, but I can't feel it coming through with my round nose pliers. I'm just going to curl that loop back towards my project. It's a little off, you can see. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to keep it a little bit off because that will actually aid me in my next step, which is going to be wrapping my beads onto my actual base here. The base also is not curved at this point. It's kind of straight. If you have a bracelet mandrel and you like the hammered look, or even if you have a metal mandrel or a ring mandrel, you can take it around and kind of hammer it down to round it out if you want. I like to do it after I actually add the beads into place. So I'm going to get ready to add my beads, and I'm going to be doing this basically with my hands. I'm not really going to require many tools. I am moving my beads into place, and my Crystal Lab O beads there at the back. They're a check glass bead that come in tubes here, if you're not familiar with bead weaving. These are great little spacers. They're ideal for bead weaving and sewing with thread and needles, but these are awesome spacers even if you're just doing basic beading. We have them in a ton of different colors, but I use them for a lot of uses, even to keep cup buttons in place and all kinds of different stuff. So it's the Crystal Labrador O bead, which for those of you that aren't familiar, they're 2 by 4 millimeters, so they're nice and thin to kind of go like that on the rondelle side. I'm going to get my 24 gauge wire here ready to go, and for that I want to cut about the same amount of wire that I did for my base. So I'm going to cut about 40 inches of this wire as well. You're going to have extra left over, but again, you don't want to have too little and have to restart in the middle. You can see when you get to the wire, it's in a little bundle and it has 2 clips, one on either side. It's kind of annoying to feed the wire through the clip, but I like to keep one on so that way it keeps my little wire gauge intact. Also, you can take a Sharpie marker if you want and write really tiny the number of the gauge here on the top, so that way if it gets separated from its bag, you know what the gauge is. Once I have that wire, I'm just gonna snip it off with my wire cutters. Set it to the side. So now we're gonna be wrapping that we have this 24 gauge wire, and we're going to be adding our beads, much like these pearls and the crystals, into place. So this is another one that, because I'm working with 40 inches of wire, I'm going to demo on a smaller piece how I'm doing the wrapping, and then I'll go in once I have a little bit less wire and continue my example on my larger piece. But for my smaller piece, I'm just going to take about 12 inches of wire and get ready to add those beads into place. So again, I have this small piece of my loops. My big piece is just kind of sitting off to the side, and I have my wire here. Again, about 40 inches for my bracelet here. This little piece, I just have a small piece so that way I can keep it in frame. I have my wire, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm always going to be wrapping on the left side of the bead. So that's something to remember. And because this is stepping up, I'm always going to have that step up action occurring. I have my wire over top of my last little loop there. So if you have your loop, it would go right next to the loop. I'm going to take this wire, and I'm going to start with the short end. And what I'm going to do is coil the wire around and through my loop, pulling the wire nice and tight. Once I have that coiled around, it's going to be coiled around both coils. I'm going to coil it around 2 more times. So it's going to end up being 3 coils total. If you have a little bit left over, you can cut it off, or you can kind of flatten it out and just tuck it down under the back, which is what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to take my pliers and just kind of tuck it to the back. And then because this is the start, I'm going to give a little pinch so that way those wires stay in place right there. That 4th coil, I'm going to just pull back out, flatten a little bit, and now I'm ready to start. So that wire is just kind of hanging out there. Right here on the start, you can see it. This bracelet here. And then I'm going to add my beads. When I'm adding my beads, I'm always going to add them in my rotation, and you can really have fun with this, but I'm adding my O bead, my turquoise, and my O bead, and those are just going to hang out right inside that loop. I'm then going to take the next wire loop and wrap around to have that wrapping going on. What I'm going to be doing is wrapping, so that way my first wrap, again, is always going to go towards the left of the bead. So I'm taking my thinner wire through the next loop, out through the loop that my bead is in, making sure that it stays to the left side of the bead. I'm pulling that through, making sure the beads and my O bead stay in place. Once I have those through, I'm going to tighten up that last little loop that I made. That wire is actually going to be going around 3 pieces of wire. So you're having 3. They're setting 1 right there and then 2, and what you're doing is joining at that link right there. So the wires aren't sitting on top of one another, they're sitting right next to one another. Once I have 1 coil, I'm going to go through and repeat. I straighten out my wire pretty much with each turn. If you have a nylon jaw pliers, you can use that as well. Always going to the left of the last coil, pulling again, and then this wire is going to go over the top. I'm going to add my next collection of my beads. Oops. Drop those down into place. Go to my next open ring here. Go through the next one. Go through the one that your bead is on, making sure those beads stay down, and you're looping around. Your loops here with a 16 gauge are right about a 10 millimeter. The loops when you do it in 18 gauge are at about an 11 millimeter. So this Potomac crystal is a 3 millimeter, 3x4, so it worked out pretty well. I like to not use a huge bead because I like to see the wire around the sides. I don't want the whole thing coated or covered with a bead. But you could use a larger bead if you want, and not the bead caps or not crystals. But I am going to take this through them. Making sure that second coil that I added goes to the left of the first. Give a nice tight pull if you need to and your wire's kind of kinking. You can also pull with your pliers. You just won't want to pull too hard or you can break your wire. Once you have that on, you're going to add your next one. And then I'm just continuing on with that same pattern. I would go to the next one, coil around 2 times, going through the next loop, going through the loop that I'm coming out of, and making sure you're always going to the left of the bead. And that then is going to keep it nice and consistent, so when you pick it up, it's always going to look like the bead is centered. If you start flip-flopping back and forth, it's going to change up the direction that the bead is actually going. That's why my perfectionist mind likes to keep it going always to the left and then adding and down and keeping that bead centered around that Neptune design. So just showing you my progress here from my sample piece, which was only 3 wide, to I now have 7 beads in place and I still have my wire. And I was just going to demo for you, even though it's still a fair amount of wire, I'm going to demo for you with that long piece of wire, the easy way to fish that wire through. One of the things that I have been doing is changing up my pattern every other. It kind of got boring. So I've been doing just a tiny little change, which I think is a little bit more eye appealing. Like this one here, I did the just 1 bead on each side. It was getting very, very patternistic, for lack of a better word. But I am doing 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So I like that look a little bit more. I'm going to then show you, so I have my beads in place here. What I do with my very end, and I have extra wire so it doesn't really matter, is I make a V in it. That makes it easier to fish through both of those right away, and it gives you something to grab onto. And that way, you don't have to kind of figure out, pull pliers up every time to try to grab onto it. Again, I'm straightening this wire out every time I'm going through, recreating that little kind of J or V hook, putting my wire in to the left of my bead, and then pulling the wire through. Always making sure that previous coil is to, or the last coil is to the left. And I'm going to add more on. This time I'm going back to my pattern of 080. And I'm going to drop that down into my wire. And I'm going to do the same thing again. I kind of turn it to the side, put my wire through. Oops. And pull. You can see as much as possible I try to turn the wire so there's not kinks in it. It just makes it, again, a little bit nicer looking. Because that's my main complaint with a lot of wire stuff, is that it looks sometimes just like a mess of wires. I like the very systematic wire. You can have fun at the end with the clasp, but that makes it look like it should be there. So I'm just going to continue on doing my last 3, and then I'll show you how I coil on to the end in order to add a clasp. If you would want to do that, do it as well. And then we're also going to bend the bracelet. So I'm getting ready here to add my last bead in place, and all I'm going to do is go to that left of that little loop bring my wire up through, because I want the wire over top of 2 pieces of wire. If it's over top of that one, it's going to shift around a little bit. Also, it kind of holds the ends together. On this one, all I did was kind of turn back the end a little bit. You can see it there. I just turned back that end a little bit, tucked it underneath so that way it's not grabbing, and went with it that way. With this one, I'm going to demonstrate how to bend it. And then if you would want to use a clasp using that extra wire that we cut. So there I have my coils in place. And what I'm going to do is cut off my extra wire. I'm going to cut it off so that way it ends towards the back, or what will become the back. I'm just going to take my pliers then and kind of pinch it down. Once I have that down and the bracelet is completed, now I get to bend it into place. This is the fun part because you actually see the bracelet take shape. I'm just doing this with my hands because I'm familiar with it. I've done it before. If you want to, you can do it around like a small orange juice glass. You can do it around a mandrel. You can put it on your wrist and just literally bend it around your wrist. But that's going to create that bangle effect for that Neptune. If you want to keep it a little bit stiffer, what you can do is bend it more into an oval shape and actually almost have it so it's like crossing over itself. That's going to bend it so that way it keeps more of that bangle look to it. And then you can put it on. It'll spring back in place a little bit, and you're just going to push it on, and that's going to have that bangle look to it. If you do want a clasp, you can have fun creating a clasp using and linking on to those extra little rings that you created. I also have here to the side just to show you that you could keep 2 loops and make a set of earrings out of them if you wanted to match and have a whole set. So if I want to do a clasp, what I'm actually going to do is create a clasp out of some of this extra wire that I had left over. So I had extra wire left over. And you can do one of 2 ways. I'm going to create just a simple S-hook and then show you a funky one as well. To create a simple S-hook, all I'm going to do is get back to my Sharpie. Leaving about 1 inch of wire, I'm going to bend it around the Sharpie till the wire touches. And then I'm going to put it back in, kind of close it up a little bit more. And I'm going to spin around so that way there's 2 complete circles, one on top of the other. Take it out. I have those 2 circles right next to one another. Take your pliers, and I'm just going to bend them apart. And that's going to get my nice little figure 8. Take your wire cutters then. Oops, don't do that. I just cut it apart, not thinking. So you get to watch me do it again. It's a nice little mistake. I'm going to open up those 2 loops there. Now when I cut, I'm not going to cut off my extra loop. I'm going to cut my wire. I'm going to cut my wire right before it hits the other piece. And then I have my 2 loops. I'm going to trim that one down just a tiny little bit so there's no crossover. Then simply with that same pliers, I'm just going to take the very edge, the very tip of the wire, and turn it back upon itself. Turning it over and squeezing down. And that's just going to keep it from catching on to anything. If you do have a little bit of a rough end, you can change the look, turn it in, or you can take a file to it. I'm going to go to the other side, bend it out just enough so that way I can hold on to it. And I'm going to bend with my pliers, bend it up, turning it over. And that's going to be your S-hook. If you want to, we could have put a bead in the middle and done it around the Sharpie, and then put the bead on, done it around the other Sharpie. And what I want to do here is I'm going to link on right to those loops that I made, but you see if I put it on right now, it's going to be sitting to the side. And I want it sitting flat because otherwise it's going to look funny on my wrist. To sit it flat, what I'm going to do is actually turn the wire loop that's on my bracelet and twist it while holding the loop so I don't mess up the integrity of the loop and the design of the loop. I'm twisting it down so that way it's laying, if you look at the bracelet, right next to the bracelet. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, turning it downward so that way it's laying right next to the bracelet. Then when I put on my S-hook, it just fits right inside those loops. You can pinch the S-hook closed a little bit. If you want to make a smaller S-hook, you can also make one that crosses over. You can make a hook and eye. And what I could do for a hook and eye is just take my round nose pliers instead of that S-hook and just kind of design it more. Bend that wire in, pull it around, and create another little loop out of it. That's going to be just a little design then. So you can really play around with the wire and design different bends and turns and curves and all that fun stuff. But once I have that clasp on then, all I do when I put it on is slide it onto my wrist and grab with the other hand. See how good I am. I'm so used to cup buttons now. I used to be really good at making clasps and loops and connecting them. And then you have your Neptune bracelet done. And you really can kind of, like I said, play around with the clasp, make it bigger, make it smaller. If I knew ahead of time that I was definitely going to do a clasp, I would make this last loop at the end just a little bit bigger. That way when you are holding on to it, it makes it a little bit easier to take on and off. But that is the Neptune bracelet featuring the rings almost around the planet. And Neptune has like really soft rings that are just hard to see, and that's where I wanted to go with this, so that way it doesn't look just like circles. It has kind of those soft rings when you turn it to the side. Fun to play around with wire, really easy to do with the household Sharpie, and it just takes a little finagling. What I say with wire working is practice definitely makes perfect. So you do want to take, it would be a good idea to take and make a couple pairs of earrings, but take a couple of pieces that are shorter like this and just practice and play around if you're not familiar with wire working. So that way when you do make your bracelet, it has a nice consistent look to it and it doesn't look like a jumbled mess of wires. But all of these materials are going to be available in any Potomac Bead Company location. If you do need them and you're not near one of our stores or traveling near one, you can drop down the show more here below the video, and that will give you a link to these products that you're using. But this is an awesome bracelet to use a bunch of different gemstone materials. You can make it kind of a mixture. You can even keep it open if you wanted to and not have the gemstones in it. You can line up seed beads. You could do 3 rows of beads rather than just 1 row. So change it up, have fun. If you want to, you can show us on Facebook what you do and show us your creations that you make. You can also check us out by subscribing to this YouTube channel, and that way you'll get little updates on different videos that we do, whether or not it's wire working or bead weaving or seed beading or just general product knowledge. We'd be happy to keep you informed, keep you in the loop, and give you some great ideas. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and as always, have fun and happy beading.